All right. Hello, I'm Callie, and I have been working on my Coding with Callie website for about a year now. It's gone through a lot of refactoring, and I want to make sure it is not only beautiful and has all the features what I want, but I also want it to be reliable. And part of reliability is making sure that all of my code is tested. So the way I have it working is if you go into GitHub, there is my unit test.yaml file. And this allows me, here, let me, appearance, how do I zoom in? Yep, there it is. Okay, so if you look at this, I have a workflow for GitHub that is going to run all of my unit tests on my backend. All right, so if I go to GitHub and I go to my Coding with Callie website, you can see that on my actions, I have my unit tests running, okay? And that's great, except I recently went through refactor and added a new service into my NestJS service, and I did not add unit tests for it, which is bad of me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm on main, so I'm going to check out a new branch, and I'm going to get to work on adding my service testing. So I'm going to say git status. All right, cool, we have nothing, so I'm gonna say git checkout -b cs add checklist unit tests. All right, I like to go ahead and just push to GitHub right away so I can see my new branch. All right, so let's go ahead and push that. All right, so these unit tests run on push to main, which is not locked down, so that can probably be removed, or on a pull request to main as well. So just pushing, right? I just pushed. Let's go back over here. Just pushing isn't going to do anything for me. If you look at my actions, I just pushed, right? You can see add checklist unit test, but it didn't do anything. Now, if I go and make a pull request here, and I compare my unit tests, right? There's nothing to compare right now, but if I were to open this, then it would run the test. So let's go ahead and let's take this out because my main branch is protected, so no one can push to it anyways, and then do, all right, yep, that was modified. And there's say edited unit test trigger. And then let's go ahead and push that up there, and we can then see that there are. So now we can merge. All right, let's create our pull request here. And now that we have a pull request, we should be able to see in the actions, our unit tests are now being triggered. So the idea is that when we are editing our code, adding a new feature on a branch, then we would create a pull request to the main branch and get our coworkers or whoever's working on this with us to review our pull request. And we also would need all of our tests to pass before we go ahead and merge. All right, and then all new code should be tested before it is merged, which we did not do because I was feeling really excited to deploy my changes. Bad Callie. All right, so you can see that a lot of my services on my back end are tested, but we added a new one, this last feature that we haven't tested. So this last feature that I worked on was this checklist. So I have this checklist service here, all right, that has a few different functions in it that are not tested. So we have get checklist by ID, get parent checklist, get checklist, create checklist, update checklist field, delete checklist. So none of these things are tested right now. So if something is wrong with them, or if in a future PR we're making a change to this, we won't know if anything is broken. Let me show you first how this feature works. All right, so we'll go over here. And if we go to, we don't see it right now because we're not logged in. So let's go ahead and log in. All right, and now you can see that we have our checklists. So here we have different checklists. If we add a checklist here, we can say live stream to YouTube. And then we can, this is creating the checklist for us. But basically, checklists can be as nested as you want. So I could add a more detailed description. This would be like something like editing it. Record myself coding. And then I can edit it, right? So that was one of the updating ones. I can add a task to it. So I would need to figure out what to live stream. And then another way that I can edit this is by moving it to in progress or done and so on. All right. So those are the different ways. Then you can also delete a checklist, which apparently I have a bug about. Each child on the list, 500. There was an error. Thank you. That was a very helpful message. Now let's go to our API. Cannot read properties of null reading ID. All right. Delete, so we were deleting a checklist. So first of all, I would just add some console logs here to get us started. So I'd say console.log checklist ID. All right, let's go. So that's the service. So that's after the request has already come through. So now we want to go to where it came in at, and that would be the auth controller. So you can see that here we have, it's a param that's getting sent in. So we should console.log. I'm going to say something like param and then checklist ID. All right. So now let's refresh this. We shouldn't have it because that checklist doesn't exist anymore. So let's go to checklists. Okay, so it did look like it deleted it, but I think what happened is, okay, so let's go into refactor coding with Callie. So this is nested task. If I click submit, right, it adds it. Now let's go into nested task and delete it. So that worked and that deleted. So let's look at what that's doing. So it deletes the checklist. All right, so checklist ID is 52. Interestingly, we did not get the params console log. All right, so we're gonna get the parent checklist, and then we're going to delete the checklist, and then we're gonna return the parent ID. So here's the thing, right? When we had a child, when we were deleting a checklist with a parent above it, it deleted it. But now that we don't have a parent, it's not gonna delete it. So let's go to get parent checklist. So yeah, we're just returning null if it doesn't have a checklist, so that's fine. So returning parent ID, okay, and then let's look at the front end now and see how the front end is working. This is a good use case though that we should add testing for when we actually start writing our tests. All right, so I'm gonna just delete. So we're to say checklist, get delete checklist. Okay. Oh, that is the ID. So delete. Oh, we're in the checklist service. Okay, we got to go to the front end. Delete button. That's just my. All right. So checklist container. That's the create checklist form. Editable. Okay, so icon, delete checklist, on click, delete checklist. So let's go to the definition for that and take a look. So we're using our Axios private instance to delete the checklist ID. Then we're navigating to checklist/response.data. So what we want to do is we want to say if response.data, right? If something is returned, then we want to navigate to the parent of the, right? Because if response.data has something, it's going to return the ID of the parent. So we want to navigate to checklist/the parent ID. Otherwise, we want to navigate to just the main checklist page. All right. So now let's go take a look at that. Okay, so let's add a test task here. All right, let's open it up. So does it have a parent? Yeah, it has refactor coding with Callie as the parent. So if we go ahead and click delete, that deleted, and then it sent us to the parent refactor coding with Callie. All right, so now let's add a test checklist here. So this test checklist, you can see, has no parent. So if I delete it, blah, we still have an error. Okay. So cannot read properties of ID. So let's go back and look at that then. All right. Delete checklist. So where is it doing that? So auth service 113. Auth service 113. Oh, oops. Or null. Okay, we didn't return null. Okay, so let's go back to checklists. Oops. All right. Let's refresh so we get fresh data. Okay, let's add back a test. All right, let's view the checklist. There's no parent of the checklist. So then when we delete, we still have issues. Cannot. Okay, so maybe we need to say if parent, return parent ID, otherwise return null. Let's try that. I'm gonna restart my server too, although I am doing it in watch mode, so it should, but just to be sure. Perfect, okay. Let's go back. Now let's add a checklist, test, submit, open the checklist, and then let's delete it. And yay, it worked. Okay, so now that that bug is fixed and you've seen a little bit of what the use case is for what we're doing today, all right, let's go ahead and commit this. So we do git status. So we changed a few files, git add, git commit. All right, we fixed bug where a checklist without a parent was deleted. And then let's push that up. Okay, and because we're pushing it up and we have an open PR, you will see that the workflow is triggered again. Okay. All right, if you don't want it triggered over and over, we could just close the PR. All right, so now that is fixed, which is nice, but we need to go ahead and write our tests. So the first thing that we need to write tests for, I'm gonna close all of this out, is the auth service has some calls to the checklist service, right? And since we didn't test the checklist service, we also didn't add tests to the auth service about the checklist service. So right here, I have my tests running, and it's on watch. So anytime I make a change to my code, it runs my test. So that's the way you could do it just while you're locally developing, okay? So auth service, we have get checklist by ID, create checklist, and then update checklist fields, and delete checklist. So we have a lot of these that we need to write tests for. All right, let's get started. So reviews already, so get checklists. Let's go to service spec. So we already have our mock checklist service, which is good. So we should be able to just add a test then. So we want to start with it. We pull this down so I can see and copy. All right, Copilot is already going. So it should call get checklist in the checklist service and return all checklists. All right, so I'm not going to just haphazardly let it tell me what to do here. All right, instead I'm going to, okay, let's take a look at what it needs. So it takes in a user ID, and then we want to test that it calls get checklist with the user ID. All right, that's the only thing that this function is doing, so that's what we're going to check for. So first I'm going to say const user ID. We can say 1. All right, and then we're going to say const checklist. It doesn't actually matter, so I'm just going to do an empty array because we're not checking that checklist actually returns a list of checklists. All right, so yep, we're going to mock the checklist service get checklist method, and we're going to mock the resolve value to be checklists. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say const result is equal to await service dot get checklist user ID, and then we're going to expect that the result is equal to checklist. So now when we save, it's going to run all of our tests and make sure that we passed. So now that we have this test, it's passed. So we want to make sure that the result is checklist, but there's more things that we want to. We want to expect that our get checklist method in the checklist service was called one time, and we want to make sure that it was called with user ID. Thank you, Copilot, for knowing exactly what I wanted to do. All right, so now that is tested. All right, next one is we wanted to get the checklist by ID. So let's go ahead and write a test for that, which hopefully Copilot knows. So it should call get checklist by ID in checklist service and return a checklist. Okay, so we need to pass in a user ID and a checklist ID. User ID 1, checklist ID 1, and yep, we can just mock an empty checklist, who cares? We will say that when this method get checklist by ID is called from the checklist service, we want to return checklist. The result of it should equal checklist. We expect that to be called one time. All right, let's save. It's going to run the tests, and perfect. All right, let's move on. Create checklist. All right. So it should call. I feel like this is less fun now, so I'm actually going to delete this because I kind of want to do it. All right, it should call create checklist in the checklist service and return all checklists. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is that this is a little bit confusing in my opinion in terms of like what it's doing, right? So it's saying it's creating a checklist, but really it's doing two things. It's creating a checklist and then it's returning the updated parent checklist, or it's returning all checklists, right? Oof, all right, so this is create checklist. I'm trying to remember, create checklist, why I did it this way. Return the updating. If we passed in a parent ID, return the updated parent checklist. Otherwise, return all checklists. Okay, so I think what this is doing here is we're saying that if we're on this main checklist page, okay, and I add a checklist, what I want it to do when I click submit is that I want it to return all of the checklists to me because I don't have a parent, I'm on the main page. But if I'm on a individual checklist page and I want to add a test task to it, then what I want is I want to just get the updated parent. So that's based on, I'm creating a checklist either way. Here it's called a task, right? But either way, I'm just creating checklists, nested in checklists, nested in checklists, okay? So, all right, we want to call this instead, we want to create a checklist, and return the appropriate checklists. Okay, so, and return updated checklists. I think I'm going to call the function that. Okay, because that's what we're doing. It's not just creating it, it's returning it as well, and this will help us later. All right, so now here we want to do create user ID, name, description, and parent ID. So should create checklist and checklist service and return all checklists. So it does that when it doesn't have a parent ID. So we are not passing in a parent ID. Okay, so const user ID is equal to 1. Perfect. All right, name, const name is equal to, sure, Callie's checklist. Description is optional. I'm not going to worry about it because it doesn't matter. So, or description. Okay. So then the next thing we want to do is mock what's called. So here we're calling the checklist service create checklist. It doesn't matter what's returned because we're not actually doing anything with it. So we don't actually need to worry about it. Here we are returning get checklist by ID, and here we are returning get checklist. So we don't have a parent ID, so we don't need to worry about that one. So I'm actually going to condense that. Here we need to mock get checklists. So we want to, let me close this a little bit so I can see. We want to say mock checklist service dot get checklists dot mock resolved value. Sure, we can just do an empty array. That's fine. All right. And then now we can say const result. We're going to call our create checklist and return updated checklists with our user ID and our name. And we expect the result to be that empty array. All right, so yay, that passed. Now let's just change it because we should see that it fails now. Perfect. Sometimes if you want to make sure that your test is testing the right thing, change what you are doing and then you'll be able to see it. Okay? But that's not ultimately what we're testing. What we want to test is that we called the create checklist and we called it with the username, name, undefined, and undefined. Okay? I'm assuming that create checklist, when that's called, yeah, description and parent ID are not a big deal. So maybe we just, I'm curious if we can just do that to make it a little bit more readable when we go through. No, it looks like we need to have undefined. Undefined. Okay, so to be called with those, okay, then we expect that get checklist has been called one time and we expect it to be called with the ID. All right, now here's the kicker. We expect that get checklist by ID is not called, okay? So we're gonna say expect get checklist ID to be called 0 times. That's good, but I actually think what I want to say not to have been called. Let me try that. Just because that's a little bit more readable. All right, perfect. So now we have this tested as well, but we need to do another test for this one to where we do use the parent ID now. Okay, so it should call create checklist and return the parent checklist. All right, so Copilot wrote that for me, so I'm just gonna go through and read it and make sure I agree. So it should call create checklist in the checklist service. and return the parent checklist. User ID 1, name Callie's checklist, parent ID 2, parent checklist. So get checklist by ID. Yep, that's the one that we want to mock. Returns the parent checklist. We expect the, yep, that's good. Did I do that with an undefined up here? No, but I think we have to leave it undefined because parent checklist to be called one time. Yes. Checklist by ID to be called one time. Perfect. All right, that looks good. So now we have tested create checklist and return updated checklist. I'm going to go ahead and commit here. And then we're going to say added tests for get checklists, get checklist by ID, and create checklist and return updated checklists. And let's push. And that should run all of those new tests as well because we have a PR open. Yep. There we go. That is running it. All right, let's see what the next one is. So update checklist fields. All right, so this is another one that is going to be a little bit interesting. So we are updating the field and not worrying about it is. Return the updated, how did we word this up here? If we passed in a parent ID, return the updated parent checklist. Otherwise, return the updated checklist. Okay, so we're updating a checklist field, and if we pass in a parent ID, then we want to get the parent checklist. Otherwise, we want to get the checklist that we're updating. So I am curious as to what our use case is on this. So I'm going to go to my auth controller and update checklists, parent ID. I'm going to do that to try to look for the call. So these are an API. Parent ID, parent ID, parent ID. All right. So this is the create a checklist form that we have here. Oh, but we don't want create, we want update. So I guess let's just do update. So update would be patch. Then yes. Okay, so we only do that once in the progress column, and we send the parent. Oh, because you know what? This is updating, right? Interesting, but let me look at put here instead. Okay, so it looks like that's guest speaker. So how do we edit the name of our checklist here? Okay, checklist. That's our breadcrumb. Let's go to our checklist container. Delete checklist. All right, so editable text here, route method. Oh, okay, you know what? It's just the way I was searching. Okay, so we are about at 30 minutes of streaming, which is what I was going to commit myself to doing. So we will pick this hopefully back up next time. and continue making our tests. Thanks for watching.